Unelected bureaucrats worldwide are waging a war on tobacco. We know smoking's bad for one's health. However, ensuring governments create a new set of interventionist policies to manage behavior is big business, and it's all done behind closed doors. What you're about to see is the Rebel.media's venture behind the curtain of the supra-nanny statist war on fun, their hypocrisy, tough tactics, censorship, and creation of winners and losers in markets worldwide. Smoking bans, bans on advertisement, anti-tobacco lobbyism, plain packaging demands, and higher taxes, all policies that affect the taxpayer directly. And each policy is initialized by unelected and unaccountable, faceless bureaucrats in faraway lands before being injected into your legislature. After 14 hours in the air, the Rebel.media finally landed in Delhi, India. Buried beneath a blanket of unworldly smog, unelected delegates from some 180 countries huddled in a convention center in the country's capital. Their focus? The Globalist War on Tobacco, articulated in the World Health Organization's Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. Now, some history. The FCTC is the first treaty negotiated under the auspices of the World Health Organization, and as such, it exists as one of the most widely embraced treaties in all of UN history. The convention claims to be an evidence-based treaty, and every 2 years, its treaty has a legislative meeting akin to a congress of all the parties that have signed on to the treaty. 180 parties gathered to vote on tobacco policies far from their nation's legislatures and elected legislators. Under the guise of the state knowing what's best for its citizens, the conference of the parties, this time in their 7th such meeting, ultimately served two purposes. One, to provide legislators with the moral high ground to raise your taxes, and two, to continue the nanny state's war on the tobacco industry's natural supply to an age-old demand by imposing more regulations on packaging and sales. But this time, a new target came into COP7 sights: electronic cigarettes.
This year, what they specifically want to tackle with e-cigs is to prevent advertising of e-cigs, to give them similar regulations as tobacco cigarettes, and probably the most devastating policy suggestion, they'll be banning all of those fun flavors of them we love. Apparently, kids and women find flavors like menthol, chocolate, and apricot too appealing, and therefore could start using e-cigs and then get addicted to cigarettes later on.
And despite evidence from the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons, as well as Public Health England, that indicated electronic cigarettes were 95% less harmful than regular tobacco cigarettes, well, the World Health Organization, they had a different agenda. Now, who gets a say in the WHO is a hotly contested issue. Even so, armed with an open mind and a commitment to reveal the inner machinations of this legislative leviathan, Lauren Southern and I were excited to attend the week-long conference. But nothing could prepare us for what happened next. In our very first plenary session on the very first day of the summit, 5 minutes to 6 p.m., when the session was scheduled to come to an end, Thailand's delegation put forward a motion to ban all media for the duration of COP7. It sounded ridiculous, perfectly draconian, Soviet-style rule that surely the vast majority of democratic signatory states ought to vote against, right? That's at least what you'd think. But tucked away in Delhi, far from the public eye and elected legislators that sent the delegates on this junket, every single nation supported the motion, including Canada. Shocked in the wake of the vote, I caught up with some of the Canadian delegation, you know, the people that you and I didn't vote for but were subsidizing, and this is what happened next.
There's a whole group of delegation from Canada that did not stand up for transparency or scrutiny of the press. We've just been banned from the duration of the summit. Canada is a country where we believe in freedom of the press, we believe in scrutiny, we believe in free and fair debate. Why does that change when you come here to a World Health Organization summit? No comment. Is there any room for comment or dissent at this organization whatsoever? With respect, Canadian taxpayers have funded everyone's way here. We understood that there was going to be a delegation that represented Canadian interests. Not a single person from the Canadian delegation stood up for Canadian media to be witness to what is going to transpire over the next week. Any comment whatsoever? Canadian delegation. This is not how things work in Canada.
I have no comment.
Any comment?
No comment.
So whose interests are you representing here?
No comment.
Canadian media talking to a Canadian delegation about concerns, about issues that concern the Canadian people.
If you'd like to have a conversation
Yes.
on the Canadian media, I'm happy to do that
Okay.
with you,
Okay, that'd be great if we could.
not online.
With respect, what's happening behind closed doors this week is going to affect some 6 billion people worldwide, including Canadian taxpayers. Canadian taxpayers have a right to know what policy is being created behind closed doors. The entire organization has just voted unanimously to ban Canadian media. We deserve some answers. I'd like to get them from you, a member of our delegation.
I'm going to try and understand exactly what this decision means, how it plays out, what that looks like, understand what it means for moving forward, understand what the room is for moving forward, and I'd be happy to chat with you again. I can give you my card if you'd like.
I would like that, but no one stood up here and voted against the motion. Is that just commonplace? You don't know what you're voting on and you just go through and see what's going to happen?
Sorry, with all due respect, I'm going to speak with my delegation, and I'm happy to come back to you.
I would like that, and I'd like your card as well.
There you go. I'm Susie. I am the head of the delegation, and as I said,
So Health Canada. So with respect, Canadian taxpayers really have sent you here, and you're not prepared to give us an answer as to what's going to be happening behind closed doors in India right now that will affect every Canadian taxpayer at home, and our media, our Canadian media that has flown 14 hours to get here, has now been banned. And Canadian delegations, including those on the public purse, have not stood up to have Canadian media there to provide scrutiny and transparency to this process.
I understand your concerns. As I said, I'm happy to follow up.
Okay, that sounds fantastic. Any further comments?
We'll follow up with you.
Thank you.
Well, I tried to follow up with that Health Canada representative, Susie McDonald. Alas, not a single email was returned. Even still, a representative from the Canadian Cancer Society, Rob Cunningham, endeavored to explain the unanimous vote to turf the international press from the Global Summit, in which decisions will be made to in turn affect some 180 nations worldwide.
I was just wondering why no one in the Canadian delegation voted against that resolution.
So this decision is similar to previous decisions of the Conference of the Parties. The tobacco industry has been the rationale behind this decision.
Media is not the tobacco industry. Certainly, there's a differentiation between them.
Yeah. So this decision is not new. It's been the decision in previous Conference of the Parties.
So a lack of transparency, a lack of scrutiny with respect to decisions that will affect millions of taxpayers, billions worldwide, but millions in Canada, and there will be no media to provide any sort of scrutiny to that process. And because of precedent, you're okay with that?
The rationale for it is this is a unique treaty, and there's a Article 5.3 in it with respect to tobacco industry interference, because of the role of the tobacco industry in undermining public health policies.
Article 5.3, it's a section of the framework that we would eventually become very familiar with, a document that, in effect, allows the parties to create an ad hoc enemies list based on unproven influence by big tobacco. Well, not all media was about to take the vote lying down. In an act of peaceful protest, one day after the vote to shut out the media, the Daily Caller's Drew Johnson returned to the portion of the conference hall that was originally intended for the international press. Drew was summarily surrounded by security and had his press pass yanked from his lanyard around his neck by a COP7 official before being physically removed. And the rebel, well, we got it all on tape.
Sir, did you pull out the journalist's lanyard? Did you just pull out the journalist's lanyard?
No, sorry.
What's your position here? Why would you pull out a journalist's lanyard? Is that an acceptable way to remove a journalist from what should be a public general meeting here? A public meeting, and you pulled out their lanyard, sir.
Okay.
Media? Yes.
It's not allowed, ma'am. Sorry.
Past that line. I'm on this side.
Don't be ridiculous. You're your children or not? Your children, your child.
No, actually, I'm a reporter from Canada.
Nah, you're a child.
Sir,
You're a child. You're joking.
you pulled out a journalist lanyard.
We'll refer to the president, and he will let me know if you will have your badge.
Give me my badge back now.
No.
And then if there's a
No,
problem
I
later.
will refer to the president because you're. So can you?
What? This is an
You-
open
you-
area.
yeah, but you don't-
This is a
you don't-
public
you don't
area, and
follow-
you're pushing
you
a
don't
woman.
follow the rules,
You're pushing
sir.
a woman.
You don't
What
follow
kind
the
of
rules.
man pushes a woman? That's
You don't follow the
ridiculous.
rules, sir. So
I need my badge so I can attend the press
I will
briefing
refer.
so I can
I will
drive.
refer to the president that you don't follow the rule.
Can I have my badge, please?
No, he's in charge of the delegation, so we'll deal with it later.
Go and speak with the press officer, and you will explain.
But if you,
I've spoken with him. I understand the
I will let him know
situation.
if you're allowed
I
to-
understand the rules.
No,
The
if
rules
you're
are
wait,
ridiculous.
You understand,
I
and you don't,
understand that the
and you
rules
don't
are
follow the
ridiculous.
rule. Why?
Correct.
Why don't you follow the rule?
Because this is a taxpayer-funded UN meeting ultimately
Yeah.
that should not be closed to journalists. And the delegates...
The members of the chiefs. Members decide there's no press today. That's a working group.
Delegates want to operate in private, behind closed doors, in smoke-filled back rooms, to make rules that apply to 6.5 million people. 90%.
When I go in United States, when a policeman tell me you're not allowed to come
Listen,
in,
you're
sir,
not a
I don't go.
policeman.
So
That's
that's same.
different.
No, that's
No,
not
that's
different.
an
It's the same.
actual law,
It's the
rather
same.
than this
No,
bullshit
that's
being made up by
that's it.
What happened? He pulled your lanyard, right? We saw him tug at your lanyard.
Pulled my lanyard off of my neck. I mean, and obviously I was very forcibly removed. And the reason I decided to stay is because the way the delegation works, it's ridiculous. This is a taxpayer-funded meeting. Those people are representatives of 180 nations. Nowhere in the world is it appropriate to have a meeting like that behind closed doors, in secret, but it's allowed here. And this is a UN agency. The UN hosts World Press Freedom Day, and they kick journalists out of their meetings. It's absolutely absurd.
Absolutely absurd is putting it mildly. Never in my entire media career had I ever witnessed a journalist being physically removed from a convention, a taxpayer-funded one at that, on the topic of public policy. Suffice it to say, the globalist push to ban the press from their powwow quickly became a news story unto itself. But we weren't the only ones kept on the sidelines. Stakeholders in the tobacco industry were as well. Indian farmers whose livelihood would be directly affected by the international talks in their own backyard were also banned. And just like Drew Johnson, the farmers were met with undemocratic, tough tactics.
There was supposed to be a large protest outside of the World Health Organization conference today of tobacco farmers saying, hey, we don't want to lose our jobs. People should be free to smoke tobacco, and we want to farm it because we make our livelihood from that. And despite the people inside the conference constantly repeating over and over again, we support tobacco farmers. We are the ones who love tobacco farmers. We want transparency. They actually went and rounded up all of these protesters, guys with guns and riot gear rounded them up, put them in buses, and shipped them off. It was absolutely insane.
Lauren and our senior producer, Hannah, then asked guards outside where the farmers had been relocated to.
Were there protests going on out here?
There, at the gate number 12.
They're at that gate?
Yeah.
Were there people out here, though, for a bit?
Yeah, they were, but they came there. You know, they just went there, actually.
They went that way?
Yeah.
Okay. They seemed really confused about what they were telling us. They said the protesters had been moved. They weren't really telling us whether they had been arrested or not. But after we started asking a bunch of questions, tons of security just surrounded us, pulled these men away from us, and started hounding us. What were we doing there? Why were we there? Why were we outside the conference? And we kind of played dumb because we didn't want to get in trouble and said we were looking for our driver, which we were at the time, but we were also looking for the protesters. And they asked to see Hannah's phone. They wanted to call the driver to make sure he was actually there. And we were just surrounded by guys with guns.
So the media were banned. The peaceful protesters disappeared. And then reporters surrounded by a swarm of armed guards facing interrogation for daring to question the farmers' whereabouts. The rebel media later learned that the farmers were indeed escorted onto chartered buses and then driven some 40 kilometers outside of town. And when the farmers were released, they were told to make their own way home. So, with no access to the committee sessions inside and no farmers to speak to outside, Lauren and I began looking for answers elsewhere. Faced with the fact that the UN was threatening a restriction of sales, advertising, and flavors of e-cigarettes, members of the vaping community, who were otherwise also banned from the conference, held meetings on the sidelines, where doctors, researchers, and other experts were unified in their claim. The UN, they say, is ignoring the science on electronic cigarettes.
If everyone who has recently started using cigarettes switched to e-cigarettes, how many lives do you think we could save in the next 50 years?
Over the long term, we're talking about millions of lives saved. But unfortunately, the whole stance and the approach towards this issue is strongly negative. And it is, there are a lot of concerns, which of course everyone has. But there is a denial about the evidence that we currently have. And we have a lot of evidence. We will never be 100% certain because we're never 100% certain about anything. And of course, we cannot predict what's going to happen in the next years. But that's the reason why we need the research. But it cannot be used as a reason to apply restrictions. Restrictions or the regulation in general and the approach will depend on what is happening today. And today, we have not witnessed any country where the use and the availability of e-cigarettes had any negative consequence on a population level.
Back on COP7 grounds, media were allowed to attend specific breakout sessions, one of which was on gendered approaches to tobacco control. So the Rebel asked the WHO's panel of experts about harm reduction as it relates to the tool COP7 was hoping to control.
One of the big harm reduction strategies that has worked for women is electronic cigarettes. A lot of the studies from the UK have shown that they can be up to 95% less harmful than regular cigarettes. A lot of the reasons women find them appealing, though, is because of the better taste, the flavors like apricot and chocolate, and it causes them to move over to e-cigarettes. Yet right now, the framework is discussing banning these flavors that are helping women quit. Do you have any comments on that?
Patricia, would you like to comment on that? Please.
I am not an expert in cessation at all, and so anything that I say on this subject has to be seen against that background. From my perspective, I am unconvinced that electronic cigarettes necessarily lead to quitting. And as an advocate for tobacco control, I am extremely reluctant to get ahead of the science and to say that there is absolute irrefutable proof that when women swap to electronic cigarettes, that has a better health outcome for them, because I haven't seen enough of the science yet. Around the banning of the flavors, if you're trying, as I understand cessation, it is possible to quit without trading down to a less harmful product. And as a tobacco control advocate, I can't see myself espousing another form of tobacco as a way of moving from one form of tobacco to another form of tobacco. It just doesn't make sense.
It's not tobacco? It's not tobacco. There's no tobacco.
Sorry, I misspoke. Yeah. It's nicotine. Why would I want to put nicotine into anybody's body?
We don't want to shift to a less harmful product. We want to shift to a product which doesn't have any harm.
That doesn't work, though.
So the World Health Organization's so-called experts did not know that tobacco is not present in electronic cigarettes, the things that they were trying to ban. Moreover, and more importantly, the globalist body's representatives admitted that she believed an actual harm reduction tool, the electronic cigarette, is not what COP7, a supposedly harm reduction body, should be trying to pursue. Well, the mental gymnastics didn't end there. As Lauren focused on the vaping beat, I kept on the Expo Center grounds for the 2 press conferences per day we were granted. Now, you're likely thinking, 2 press conferences a day, that should be plenty. Well, think again. We were handed hundreds of pages of documents littered with the entirety of the globalist alphabet soup, the WHO's FCTC, COP7, and every time we tried to ask a question, they'd just point us back to the documents. And if we dared to ask for clarification, well, this was the sort of response we received.
Nobody's talking to you. I made it up for yourselves. I don't think any of your questions are unique.
So after not making any headway on the ground in India, our colleagues in Toronto decided to take the reins. They made our complaint official. Our media lawyers drafted a letter to Canada's Minister of Health, Jane Philpott, the woman responsible for sending Canada's unelected and unaccountable delegates whose hotels and airfares you and I paid for just before they voted to throw us out of the conference that we were supposed to cover. Yeah. The letter was a simple reminder to the minister of a few things like Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms, as well as the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, both of which afford and affirm freedoms of speech and freedoms of expression. Most importantly, freedom of the press. We also sent a letter to the FCTC Secretariat, again, just formalizing our complaint. In that letter, we reminded the Secretariat of the FCTC's objective of engaging the public at large. There was no threat of legal action in either of those letters, a fact made abundantly clear to anyone who took the time to read them. We were simply reminding everyone of their duties and our rights and our freedoms. And this was the response we got.
If you're going to start bringing in solicitors and lawyers and advocates, it gets a bit sort of like formal then, doesn't it? Because then we'll say, your lawyers talk to our lawyers, and that's the end of our beautiful relationship, you know what I mean? Because we can't have two relationships running. Sure, okay. We can't have an open and frank discussions and interviews and everything whilst we've got a legal notice in the office. I need to check with our legal team on it. They've been working all day, but they'll have a look at it this evening.
Okay, that's not really how I see it. I see it as them sorting that out while we continue at our press briefings, which is what we're allowed to do.
Any solicitor's letter I've got in my business and journalism, it's generally, okay, great, let's all see each other in court then.
And it wasn't just the WHO's media handlers who were trying to shake us down during the limited exposure we had to the Conference of the Parties. Remember Rob Cunningham with the Canadian Cancer Society from a little earlier on? Well, just a few days after our initial interaction, he accosted us in the press quarantine room. Not knowing what to expect, we hit record, and this is what he had to say.
Out of curiosity, what sort of feedback were you getting? What sort of questions about your rebel media?
Who funds them?
Who funds them? What was the speculation?
Well, what do you think?
You tell me.
Well, you get funding from tobacco or other.
Unbelievable. The Canadian delegation, representatives from Canada, all the way in India on our dime, received questions about how our money is being spent, who these people are, and what sort of mandate they have. And their response is to accuse us of working for Big Tobacco. Now, to be sure, the Rebel.media receives absolutely no backing from Big Tobacco. We were only at the conference because we were interested in observing the machinations of this supranational body and dissecting the nanny-statist logic that is so rampant within that stratum. The convention could have been about food, so-called big sugar or big salt, about SUVs or red meat. It would not have changed our own mandate to report the truth, even if busybodies from some 180 nations were trying to conceal it from us. But here's the thing. While these war on fun fat cats were concealing the truth from us, other media received different treatment. 3 Reuters journalists were known to be on the ground at COP7 in Delhi. I had seen all 3 roaming the halls, poking about in the dining area. Where I did not see them, though, was inside the press briefing room, ever. And what was equally bizarre was, by the last day of the conference, not a single one of the 3 released so much as one story on the conference. Not about the media ban, not about the framework's goals, nothing, radio silence. It was then that we received a tip that all 3 had been seen inside committee meetings. You know, that hallowed ground reserved only for the faceless bureaucrats, and woe to the journalists who dared to enter lest they wind up like Drew Johnson. Yeah, there. The whole world's media was banned from entering the conference committee meetings, but 3 Reuters journalists somehow got a hall pass? Well, I decided to ask the three Reuters reporters point blank if they had been attending committee meetings all week that had otherwise been closed to media. Look at what happened next.
We received reports that all three of you gentlemen, specifically Duff and you as well, Tom, had been seen inside the committee meetings during the course of this week.
I don't, it's not... You'll have to talk to our editors. We won't say anything. Nobody will say anything. You'll have to talk to our editors. I can give you the email.
I'd like that very much. So you're not denying the fact that you were inside those rooms?
Excuse me? I said you have to talk to our editors. Nobody's answering anything.
So you were given special access to enter these committee meetings when the rest of the media was quarantined and banned?
Again, we're here to report on the process.
So am I. Believe me. So I appreciate that, and we all want to get answers while here, and I'm just wondering if you three gentlemen got more answers than the rest of us.
No special access.
No special access. So you did not get to go into the committee meetings?
That's right.
You were not inside the committee meetings at any time?
You should talk to our editors about it.
And so I followed up. I reached out to their editor via email, but you can guess what happened next. Yeah, no response. But we here at The Rebel are staying on this story and continuing to investigate why these three journalists were reportedly inside the conference when everyone else had been banned. Covering COP7 in India was an extraordinary and truly illuminating experience for us at The Rebel. We learned so much. I'm afraid to say our suspicions were indeed confirmed. Our democratic, liberal values of freedom of speech and free press, well, they're not being applied, even by Canadians, when our delegates are supposedly representing us abroad. The model of globalism, well, it removes the individual, the voter, the taxpayer entirely from the legislative process. But that doesn't mean that you weren't involved in our journalistic process. The Rebel.media operates in the most democratic way possible. We cover stories because our viewers express interest in them in word and deed and donation. It's because of your support, your visits to rebelun.com, that Lauren and I were able to travel with our crew to India and report on the truth about the heavy hand of globalist rule that affects your legislatures, your lives, and your pocketbooks without your consent. And for that, we thank you. For the Rebel.media, I'm Faith Goldie. We cover a lot of stories with international reach, specifically on the topic of globalism. If you liked what you just saw, click below and subscribe to our YouTube channel.